Reilly. How many people know Reilly? Or have read Reilly's work? Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you. You've got a little fan club out here, Reilly. Reilly is a drugs reporter, been featured in lots of magazines, Washington Post, DoubleBlind, Chacruna, Lucid News, Maps Bulletin. I didn't know until I went on Reilly's Authory page, is that how you call it? How prolific Reilly is. I didn't know. You're also a somewhat new father, and you've been a very consistent advocate since day one, and much of his reporting in the Rooster magazine was part of the help sort of catalyze and bring attention to the decriminalization vote in Denver, which was the world's first. So Reilly's covered, thank you. So Reilly's covered just a lot of the psychedelic movement over the years, and he's written articles about cannabis, about microdosing, about ketamine clinics, about festival culture, about the thank you plant medicine wave, about all kinds of things. I saw in Lucid News in October he had this article, Will Psychedelic Companies Embrace Indigenous Reciprocity? Like, he's covered so much like breadth of this movement that we thought it was a perfect way to end the year to invite Reilly up to kind of give us some clue in, so to that sort of high level view that he might be able to carry. And some of this is, you know, if you're psychedelic insiders, it might not be new information, but it'll just bring up some like interesting points, I think, and bring some sort of closure to like where we're at and where we could possibly go. So, with all that said, please help me welcome. Thank you so much for being here, Reilly.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is my favorite room of the month. I absolutely love being here. I love seeing everybody. It really gives me so much hope to see this crew. Yeah, so this talk is, well, first of all, just thank you so much for coming and so much for showing up so often. I love seeing the same faces that are here all the time. It's really, the idea that psychedelics will be stewarded by people like you who are so thoughtful and engaged, who show such care and such depth of knowledge is really a wonderful thing, and it makes me very hopeful for the future. This talk is sort of my answer to the question when people ask me, like, where is this going? Where are psychedelics going? And the answer, of course, is that I don't know. I can't see the future. The ayahuasqueros in the Amazon say that they drink ayahuasca and they can tell the future. I am not there yet. I'm working on it. As of now, this is really more about where we are right now, and also thinking about how the conversations that happen in this room and in rooms like it all around Colorado and all around the country and around the world are going to shape the way the future goes. And we're at a very crucial time in the future of psychedelics in which the conversations and the decisions that get made like right now, and I mean like right now, I mean like the next couple months, I mean like the next 10 months are going to be extremely crucial. It's going to shape the trajectory. And so, as much as me like telling you where I think that trajectory is going to go, I'm going to make sure that I leave a lot of time open so that y'all can talk to me and talk to each other about where you think the trajectory is going and where you'd like to see it go, because there's so much wisdom in this room, and so I wanted to tap into that. So, I want to start off by talking about how hot it is out there. This is what I saw on Twitter the other day. An old man tells kids a story about the last time it snowed in Denver. And that is the kind of thing that we're dealing with as a society. It is the most existential threat. And if we don't come to terms with that, we are in trouble. And there is some evidence that psychedelics can help with this. There's correlation between nature-relatedness and lifetime use of psychedelics. And so if that's all these things do, if they get people more in touch with nature and more aware of what's going on with the environment, I think that's more than enough. So as Shannon said, I've written for a bunch of magazines and newspapers about all kinds of things, and about drugs specifically. I've written hundreds of articles. It's one of the only jobs I've ever had where they gave me a drug test at the beginning to make sure I was taking enough drugs. And I passed. Most of my articles, hundreds of articles, were for Rooster magazine, which is this wonderful local print magazine. It's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I was the drugs part of that. And so I interviewed people about all kinds of different drug-related things, from opioids to marijuana to psychedelics. And I've learned a lot about drugs by interviewing these hundreds and hundreds of people. And what I learned was that there are drugs that change people's bodies and they change people's immediate surroundings. Like meth brings people up and opioids kill the pain. And these are all have really deep impact in people's lives. And it's not that these are not important drugs, they totally are. But the things I learned talking to people that use psychedelics were like so much a level beyond just it killed pain or it made me more productive or things like this. I met people that said whose whole belief systems changed because of psychedelics. They came to believe in God and aliens, that we're living in a simulation, that the moon landing didn't happen, that mushrooms talk, that they were born on other planets. Some of those you said, okay, that's great. Do you believe that? I think that's wonderful. Sometimes you said, might want to talk to somebody about that. There were more things that were more unambiguously healthy, like people who said that it used psychedelics to cure their bodies, their cluster headaches, people who used it to go farther and longer on their runs and their exercises, people who did help their depression, anxiety, PTSD, all of these things. Hearing these individual stories really made me think that these are incredibly important medicines. So I think the question that I want to address is, how will psychedelics be in our lives? I am obliged to remind you that psychedelics grow naturally. No one has to make them, no one has to do anything. And that we might have taken them as far back as when we were hominids out on the plains of Africa. So they've never not been in the lives of humans. And I also want to say, like, they've also, and where are they right now, I think is the next thing I want to point out. And we all know where they're at. People grow mushrooms at home. People do, side drug deals with their friends. That's where they go to the dark net. They take drugs at festivals. There are about 3 churches in the United States that you can legally take psychedelics. You can go to Ketamine Clinics, and that's the thing that a lot of you are involved in at the moment. There is Ayahuasca in the global south and Iboga over in Africa. So that's what's happening right now. And you all know this, you all have used these drugs. Maybe some of you, sorry. I'm looking at the crowd. So I think that we know that they're going to be in our lives more in the future, but the question is how? Will it be like cannabis? Cannabis you can basically buy on every street corner in 30 or so states. There are cannabis vending machines. Is that the way it's going to go? Maybe. Will we see a backlash? Will they eventually go, will someone have a reactionary view and shut everything down and say no one can have any psychedelics? Maybe. I see that as less likely because the political will is changing. This is a recent study that said 1/3 of US voters know that magic mushrooms are medicine. That's much, much higher than it was 5 or 10 years ago. But again, so they may be sold in vending machines, they may be sold on every corner, but I kind of don't think so. And part of the reason is based on, like Amsterdam, where they've been selling mushrooms forever, they're kind of clamping down on it. You can't buy the mushrooms anymore, you can only buy the sclerotia. And just like walking around and talking to people and reporting on this stuff, it doesn't exactly seem to me that there's the will to just have them in every 7-Eleven. Could be wrong about that. I think also I want to say, like, there's never been a society that I'm aware of that had psychedelics that didn't have some kind of rules around them, whether they were like formal rules, they were more like community rules where people sort of knew the rules. There's always been some sort of something. So I think if there's going to be rules, powerful things tend to get rules around them. I want to point out the spectrum of control, the spectrum of regulation or something like that, to how these psychedelics could exist in our lives. And I'm calling them the Western hierarchical and the Southern community. And the Western hierarchical is sort of vertical, and the Southern community is sort of horizontal or mycelial. And again, both of these methods of regulation go back thousands of years. And I'm not trying to say that one is better than the other. I think they both have, that's not my place. The first one is a picture, on the left, is a picture of the Mysteries of Eleusis, which is a Greek tradition that existed for a long time, centuries and centuries, in which people came from Athens to a sacred spot, and they took a brew. It's called the kykeon. Some people think it was an LSD-ish thing, that it comes from ergot, a rye, a fungus that grows on rye. And that in this altered state, they saw the deepest thing that you can see, which they often said was the knowledge that death is not the end. Because they saw something more, something bigger, something deeper and more profound. Now, that is sort of the psychedelic of the West. If we come from the European tradition, if you're talking about that, that's our psychedelic history. And it came through this hierarchical model, where there was one priestess that could give it to you on one particular day, in one particular place, for one particular reason. Couldn't do it on your own, couldn't do it at home, couldn't do it with your friends. You had to do it in this particular way. And so that is not, so we talk about like, and that continued down to this day. So on the left there, I think there's a continuous like lineage of, in the West, getting your most sacred thing through a hierarchical structure. Am I making sense here? Does this, you have the Catholic Church here, where you have to get the most sacred thing from a particular person, on a particular day, in a particular way, for a particular reason. Does this track? Okay. And so that's what we are moving toward in the West, in terms of, that's what seems to have the most momentum in the psychedelic space here in the West. We're moving toward a Western hierarchical medical model. Definitely not as strict as something like the Mystery of Eleusis or something like that, but you will have to go to a doctor to get a prescription. You'll have to do it with a therapist or in a prescribed way. At least that's the way it's going right now. Are people generally familiar with these medical trials that's going on, where MDMA is likely to be legalized for therapeutic use in 2023? Psilocybin somewhere around the same time, through a prescription, through a doctor. This hierarchical medical model. And people are seeing this as the next drug industry. It's likely to be big. There are already more than 50 clinical trials in progress for drugs such as MDMA, 5-MeO, DMT, LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, for all kind of indications: depression, suicidal ideation, anxiety, Parkinson's, eating disorders, and more and more. I hear about new ones every week. So, and this is how we get our medicine right now, right? You want lisinopril, you want anticoagulants, you want any kind of drug, you go to a doctor and you talk to a doctor, and the doctor guides you through it, right? And there are very serious benefits to this that we've established over decades, right? You have medical control, you screen out risky people, you have follow-up, your insurance can pay for it. I mean, doctors are not to be discounted, and nurses and technicians, people know things, and it's worthwhile to listen to them. There are, of course, downsides to this model, which I'll skip for now because I'll talk. But, so this is a massive thing that's happening right now. Ketamine clinics are being built almost as fast as they can build them. And their idea is that they're going to slip MDMA and psilocybin into these ketamine clinics as soon as it becomes legal in 2023 or so. I know a lot of you are riding that train and waiting for that to happen. So this is someone in our community, Jen Pfizer, has this beautiful ketamine clinic I really like. And they're helping people. I've talked to people that have really changed their lives going to these places. So that is the trajectory that things are going, and there's so much momentum behind it that it seems like that's likely to happen. So, second part, this more mycelial model. That is also happening at the exact same time, at the hierarchical, at the same time as the medical hierarchical top-down thing is happening. There's also this mycelial thing, that's this horizontal thing. Mycelial is the roots or body of the mushroom that goes underground to link the different components of the forest together to move resources from one part of the forest to another. It's this more organic way of organizing things. And so our best example of that is the way they do things in South America. South America also has some hierarchy, and I'm talking about ayahuasca basically. Ayahuasca is this jungle brew that comes from a vine and a branch, and you trip really hard. And the communities that use it, there are varying approaches. It's not like there's one person that tells you how to do ayahuasca. You do it, this guy does it over here, does it like this community does it over here like this. I put these plants in my brew, I put these plants in my brew. I don't trust that guy, he's a brujo, he's a witch. I don't trust that lady, she has bad energy. But still with some community control of but on that level, don't go to him, he's no good. Not a giant license giving organization back in Washington, D.C. And I think one of the interesting things about that model is that you do a much more community healing, much more relation to each other and relation to nature. They sort of tend to view all healing as you've gone out of balance with the plants, you've gone out of balance with your family, you've gone out of balance with the community, and we're going to try to bring you back in balance with the community or nature or God or whatever. It's not like this Western idea where my machinery has broken, like I'm an old Volkswagen, and we're going to go in and put a new cog in, and that's going to make me better, just as my own person standing here. No one is good or bad except as they're good or bad in relation to other people. And so that is, so the way we're moving toward a mycelial, organizational, decentralized model is with decriminalization and community control. And Denver absolutely set the standard on this by decriminalizing psilocybin back in 2019. In decrim, of course, the state loses the power to punish you, but doesn't say what you can do or what you can't do. Well, it says what you can't do. The big organization in this is Decriminalized Nature, and there are Decriminalized Nature all over the country. I don't know if you can see that, but there are organizations in every state almost, 3 or 4 here in Colorado. And there's been some big wins. Something like 8 cities have decriminalized some entheogens, as they're calling them. Oregon, of course, decriminalized all drugs. And the biggest ones in Colorado are Decriminalized Nature Boulder and Decriminalized Nature Colorado Springs, who seem to be moving towards similar things. So that's a hopeful thing. But what does that look like on the ground? We know what it looks like to go to a doctor and get MDMA and trip with a therapist. We sort of do. You can sort of picture it in your mind. You go to a ketamine clinic that's here right now, you can sort of figure what an MDMA thing is going to look like. What does decriminalization look like? And that depends on where you are, and it depends on how things are going. So I just want to point out how things are going in Denver from my perspective of having written about this a lot and watching it unfold. And like I said, I wrote about it a ton before it happened. I wrote about it when it happened. Everyone was saying it was going to lose, and I was like, I don't know if it's going to lose. And then I got the first story out saying it was winning, and that was a very fun day on Twitter. So they just released this report to say how it's been going for the last 2 years, and they said there's been really no significant downsides. They've had no hospital admissions from psilocybin, no emergency room visits, no deaths. But it's not like, that's partly because it's not like a lot happening. No, that's not. There's not a lot happening, is all I want to say. There's not like, I thought there would be retreats. I thought there would be stores. I thought there would be churches. I thought there would be camps. I thought there would be a lot of things happening. And it's just not. You can buy them in head shops. Like if you go to the right head shops and you know somebody and you look cool and you don't look like a narc, they will sell you mushrooms under the table. I just discovered this. So it's these loose organizations, this loose kind of like, it's just these organizations that are doing little, not little, but people are doing things. NOAC Society is organizing. SPORE is organizing. Decriminalized Nature is organizing. Trying to figure out what's next, but there's no, it's not open. Like I said, it's hard to buy them. It's hard to find places to trip. There are people that will sit with you. Toby will sit with you. If you need Toby's number, I can give you Toby's number. If you bring your own mushrooms, you can sit with him because the lawyers say that's probably okay. You can say that's harm reduction. These are some other guys I found on the internet that will sit with you while you trip on your own mushrooms. But it's not a lot. There's only one Denver retreat that I know of, openly booking retreats on the internet. Does anybody know these folks? The Eden retreat, you know? Are they cool? Is that I don't know, or you don't think so?
I don't know. I know of them and I've heard of them, but I don't know.
Okay. So that's the only one I could find. Of course, there's a lot underground, but if you just come here as a tourist or whatever, you can. And honestly, there's not as many underground as I would have thought. Part of this is fear of the DEA. People here are very afraid of the DEA. DEA did a big a raid of a guy in 2019. He was growing thousands of dollars worth of mushrooms a month, and they took him in and stole his mushrooms, and he ended up not getting any anything significant punishment, but it still puts such a chill over the whole Denver scene. Tons of people threw away their grows, tons of people stopped talking about it. Attendance at these kind of meetings went down. So the DEA still has a lot of power because all of this is federally illegal. You can go to prison. Oakland, I think, is a slightly different story than us. I think they are going harder and bigger and more open. This church was raided by the DEA, but then they reopened, and you can still go there. Because in Oakland, I guess it's just a little more out there. In Canada is more open. For some reason in Canada, they just don't have the same fear of cops or something that we do. I tweeted yesterday or so about there is a float tank center that will sell you 1p LSD microdoses on your way in. Which, good for them. So, people are buying tickets to Canada? One thing that I want to say, as much as these like community things are not really happening as much as maybe some of us would like them to happen, is that they have an advantage over the like medical model in that they're based on relationships. Shannon was talking about relationships, and so in order to find mushrooms in Denver, you have to know somebody. You can't just walk in off the street and find them, and so you can't kind of get in trouble with them if you don't have somebody that knows you and cares about you. So the relationship model is, the relationship part of this is key. You know, we can have this medical model, but therapists and clients are banned from being friends. And we know healing comes from strong relationships, right? With people knowing and trusting each other. But if a therapist becomes friends with the person that they're doing the therapy with, they could lose their license. And so healing in the medical model becomes more of a solitary thing, a private thing. Doctors give you the healing rather than we work together to heal each other or come in balance with each other. I also want to say one more thing about businesses, which is that businesses cannot hold a whole person. Businesses cannot hold your birth, your marriage, your parenthood, your death. Only communities and religions can do that. So we need more here in Denver. Like, this decriminalization thing is not enough. What should we have? And this is some of the things that I want y'all to talk about when I finish here in a few minutes. And I just want to make sure that we're asking the people that actually use these things what kind of control or regulations or community they want. One of the things that NOAC is doing, and that I'm helping out with, is a study of the psilocybin practitioners here in the state. We want to know how people that are using mushrooms right now are using them and what they want in future regulations. So we interviewed 16 people, and I call them practitioners, but these are mostly guides, people that, and sitters, people that will sit with you. One of them is a microdosing coach, one of them is, at least one is a religious person, but we're mostly dealing with guides and sitters. So what do they want in new regulations? First of all, I wanted to talk about this shift in language. Like, they don't want to be called underground anymore, a lot of them. They want to be called community guides. Underground, like, conjures up like these dark alleys and like being chased by the cops. And that's not really what it's about. So we asked them, what do you want in future regulations? And there's a spectrum of opinion, and a lot of them didn't know. But I think importantly, none of them wanted no regulations. And none of them wanted, like, I keep using that word regulations, but none of them wanted no, like, rules, no, like, free-for-all. None of them wanted free-for-all. None of them wanted 16-year-olds. None of them wanted, you know, tripping while you're driving, you know, things like that. But so it's very inchoate what they want. But one of the things they want is just community, people working together. And they want more freedom, because if you're just going with this medical model, there are certain things that you can't do. You know, you can't, it's questionable whether you can use song, prayer, movement, and other healing practices that are very important to a lot of these people. They want to be able to befriend their clients, many of them, to create these relationships, to seed communities. I know there are problems with that. There are, you know, ethical hazards of that. People can manipulate. There are power dynamics here. There are drugs that can lower guards, that can make people feel more sexual. Those are real questions. But some of them say that the iron fist of DORA that tells you can't be friends with your clients is too harsh. You know, they want to be able to work in nature, in their clients' houses, not just their clinic. They want to be able to work with different substances at different doses, even combining them. You know, MDMA with psychedelics is a very popular combination. Be able to microdose. It doesn't make sense you need a therapist to take 1/10 of a gram of mushrooms. That doesn't compute. So we wrote this, Shannon mostly wrote our preliminary understanding, our preliminary findings of this study, and we included them in this report that went to the city council a couple weeks ago. So the city council knows about this at least, and hopefully they'll consider some of it when they're thinking up the next round of regulations. They've been pitched on community, like you can sit with your friends, and they've been pitched on you can gifting and community sitting. They did not look very receptive to that the other day. So I think the next move might be another initiative, another vote by the people for what people want. And based on this study also that we did with the NOAC Society, I wrote an article for DoubleBlind, which is this wonderful psychedelic magazine. Really beautiful, really cool. And it's coming out soon. And I quoted multiple guides who told me why they wanted community regulation of this stuff. And they had all these great answers that I've talked about here. And I quoted someone from a kind of prominent community of guides who assured me we can regulate ourselves. We have systems for taking care of bad actors. We are safe. If something happens, we know how to take care of it. I said that sounds really cool and very hopeful. And I wrote that in the article. And then a couple weeks later, there was a big news story where this community was rocked by one of the bigger sex scandals in recent times. And part of the leadership was doing some sexually inappropriate things. And so I think, like, if you're the gold standard for self-regulation and you can't regulate even your own leader, it brings up some questions about self-regulation. Brings up some questions. So what could community like regulation look like? I think that is extremely up in the air. One of the more concrete pitches or ideas is from the Oakland Community Healing Initiative from Decriminalized Nature's headquarters in Oakland, where psychedelics are given out by community organizations and regulated by a community board. I think that's super interesting. And then we're going to talk about what's going to happen in Oregon. And I'm not sure whether we qualify that as hierarchical or we qualify that as more community. It's fairly liberal in Oregon. Well, let me just say it clearly. In Oregon in 2023, you'll be able to take mushrooms with somebody. That will be legal. And the rules around it are fairly liberal. Like, there's not a lot of regulations about why you can take it. I mean, you don't have to be depressed, you don't have to have anxiety, you don't have to have end of life. If you just want to go sit and try these medicines, you can do that. Of course, there are limitations to this. And then this is what's coming down the pike for us in Colorado. As I said, it doesn't seem like the city council is going to do anything. So the language has been filed with the state by New Approach Colorado, which is a national drug policy reform organization. They did the 109 in Oregon, which is the Oregon psilocybin law. And the idea is to do what's happening in Oregon, where you can sit with somebody and take mushrooms, but possibly expand it to include ayahuasca, ibogaine, DMT, mescaline, these natural entheogens that are some of the most common, the most well known. It's a very broad and very open law. You don't have to be a therapist to sit with people. You do not need to have an indication. You don't have to be anxious or depressed. You do need preparation and integration sessions before and after. And from the looks of it, it's very fluid right now. Like, these folks, from what I hear, and Shannon has been working a little bit, they're a little bit open to changing it and listening to the community. Yeah. So this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this right now, is because I think I wanted to make sure that everybody is talking about this that can possibly talk about this right now. Because this is happening super quickly. This language will have to be figured out in the next, I think it's 2 months. And then it may start collecting signatures, and it may be on the ballot in November of 2022. That is incredibly fast, it seems like. You know, obviously there are things that I would like to be different. I don't know why ibogaine's in there, but not MDMA or LSD or even cocaine. I think you should be able to sit with somebody and take cocaine if you want to. That's just me. So I want to make sure that when we get to the discussion that we talk about that particular bill, because that is the bill on the table right now. So, concluding thoughts. Will one of these systems dominate? Can they coexist? I think the hope among a lot of people is that the better angels of our nature will allow these two systems to coexist, that one won't squash out the other. If we appeal to our spirit of siblinghood, I think that can happen. My one caveat, historically speaking, is that Western hierarchical tends to push out Southern community mycelial. that is at least what happened 400 years ago when the Spanish came and brought their hierarchical religion that came and basically destroyed the community religions of the South and West and Mexico. Not saying that's necessarily going to happen this time, but it's possible. So, you know, this is big business. This is big stuff right now. This is the cover of Newsweek a couple months ago. These are some of the companies that are existing. You probably can't read that, but Tide is now a $2.5 billion company. This is a psychedelic company with $2.5 billion. And again, with this idea of, this is my one caveat, just that my mycelial community tends to get crushed by the hierarchy. That's what's tend to happen over history. Compass, for example, is a giant company that's trying to legalize psilocybin therapy, and they've done this thing where they've tried to, and failed thankfully, patent like having soft furniture in muted colors and like a nice stereo. Yeah. They say they're not going to try to enforce that, but if they do, oh man. Anybody with a nice stereo better like pay them some royalties. Again, not all companies are bad. Usona is giving its recipe for psilocybin out for free. MAPS gives most of its intellectual property away for free. So worlds are colliding. The underground is coming up. That's our mayor. That's Pam. Pam and I talked on the steps of the city capitol a couple weeks ago. And so they're starting to listen. This is my favorite politician in Colorado, Art Goodtimes. He's been running mushroom circles in his little yurt. I don't know if I should say that on camera. For a long time, and he is a big influential voice in this sort of thing. So it's the outside coming, the underground's coming up, and that's interesting. And then the last thing, this is what I'm writing about this week, is I'm writing about Soy, who is an Ayahuasquero down in the Amazon, the New Cali River. And I just want to give him the last word, because what he says is, in contrast to what we think about this being about molecules, and this being about our brains being broken, or this being about having fun at a concert or whatever, he says it's the plants themselves that heal a person, or the spirit of the plants working at the direction of the curandero. He says the healer is just a guide. He tells the plants, do this here, cure there. The curandero is there to sort of open the body of the pasajero, the person who's taking the medicine, and to allow the plant, the spirit of the plant, to come in. Sort of like washing the interior of your car, but on a spiritual level. And I asked the researcher who's writing about him if he thinks people down on the Amazon are happier. And I've been to the Amazon, I've been to some of these villages, and I'm not sure. What he said was, he says he thinks they're happier. He says they're more prone to joyful experiences and less worry. Because he says they know that whatever happens to them, they are part of a tribe, they're part of a community, and that their healing always exists within. And so he thinks they don't have the same level of loneliness that we have. So the hope is that if we can connect with more of this kind of level of thinking, mix it with some of the best things that we have, that we know, that we've learned, that our beautiful science and smart people have come up with, that we can create an interweaving that can lead us into a beautiful, brighter, happier, more connected place. And with that, I want to have questions and talk, and I want to open it up now. So thank you so much for listening.